Please welcome back to the City Club of Chicago the intellectual powerhouse of the Thompson administration, Paula Wolf. Doctor?
Ellen, you know her biography from having seen the invitation that came out on her, so I won't go into that in great detail other than to say she's a graduate of Brown University and she has a master's in finance and marketing from Northwestern. This famous person that was introduced as the Northern Trust executive also happens to be Ellen's wife, and they have 2 daughters. She takes excruciating good care of all 3 of them, so she should get special rewards for that. I was going to talk about how hard it is to give away $40 million a year, but I know I will have no sympathy from this crowd on that front. But let me just point out 3 important attributes that Ellen brings to the Joyce Foundation that are important for all foundations, but she does them enormously well. First of all, she knows what she's doing. In foundation talk, that's about program and guidelines and so forth. But Ellen, I've watched over the last year, move the foundation from a broad portfolio, shall we say, in the environmental area to a narrower portfolio. She's going to take sulfur dioxide out of our lives forever, and she's doing that by focusing on some very, very important new technologies I hope she may talk about. But it's an example of somebody figuring out what she wants to do. And the second great attribute is she knows how to do it. And that's an example where the Joyce Foundation has actually changed its methodology in a couple of areas. One I'm particularly pleased with is in thinking about how you do transitional jobs for people who have been incarcerated. And they came up with a wonderful idea, put out a request for proposals. They didn't go out chasing people, and they put together a great example of that. So she knows what she's doing, and she knows how to do it. And third, and for me most important, and this is something that I think is unusual in people who work in foundations, Ellen does not believe it's her money. So when you come to the Joyce Foundation, you come with an understanding that the Joyce Foundation is an organization which, under the IRS rules, is a foundation and has its tax status because it is providing a public purpose and it's doing something right in terms of the society. People who work in foundations have a very important fiduciary responsibility to live and breathe that idea as they are giving out the money, and I think Ellen personifies that, and we're lucky to have her at the Joyce Foundation, and I'm delighted to introduce her.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Paula. I'd like to acknowledge also Roger Frost is in the audience, who's a wonderful, longtime board member of the foundation. Valerie Jarrett is a board member of the foundation. And of course, Paula is a member of our board. And all of them are really responsible for the fact that the foundation is able to take the positions that it does and do the work that it does. I really appreciate my colleagues, my friends, and the many people who've worked with the foundation who are here today. And it's great to see you all. Some of you know that I'm originally from New York, though I moved here and fell in love with Chicago about 25 years ago, and also fell in love with my Chicago husband at that time, which sort of committed me to staying here. Way back then, I was like a lot of New Yorkers, and I was quite sure that New York was the center of the universe. It didn't really take me long to realize, though, how wrong I was. As it turns out, Chicago is the center of the universe. It's really a great city, a great place to live and raise children, and a great place to work on issues that I and a lot of people in this room really care about. Why is it such a great place? It's largely because it has great leadership. Right now, I think, and I think a lot of people in this room agree, that Chicago is at a tremendous moment in its history. We're going through a period of innovation and energy that few cities can match. Our business, university, healthcare, community, and political leaders have tackled challenges that cities around the nation are struggling with. A couple of examples. In the environment, everything from rain barrels and rooftop gardens to the development of the Chicago Climate Exchange, which is creating an international market for carbon emissions. Innovations like these led the New York Times to comment that, quote, Chicago has become a global model for how a metropolis can pursue environmental goals to achieve economic success. Our school system, once famously declared the worst in the nation, has actually shown tremendous improvement after 2 decades of sustained effort. Crime. We have cut homicides by a third, from 666 murders in '01 to 448 in '04. This year alone, murders are down another 7%, and this is in a time when, unfortunately, murders are up dramatically in many other cities. So these are just a few reasons to feel optimistic about Chicago and really proud of the work that all of us have done in this room to move these issues along. I know that many of you are familiar with the Joyce Foundation, but many of you aren't, and I hope you'll indulge me if I could just take a few minutes to explain our work, and I'll go into a little detail about some of the really exciting projects we've launched in the last year, several of which Paula referred to. First, a word on foundations. What we do basically is give money away. It doesn't really sound so hard. I know I get no sympathy from Paula or anyone else. But when you start trying to do it in a way that makes a lasting impact, it really isn't that easy. Foundations like ours operate in a uniquely flexible environment. Unlike businesses, we're not subject to market pressures. We have an endowment, which in our case is about $850 million, which covers what we give away and all our expenses for as long as we choose to operate. So we don't need to raise money or sell products. Market conditions matter to the extent that it affects our investments, but overall we're insulated from most of the day-to-day pressure that most institutions feel. Unlike government bodies, we're not subject to direct political pressure. On occasion, we'll take a position or fund an issue that gets us in hot water with one group or another, and more on that later. But generally, we are free to try out new or unpopular ideas without worrying about day-to-day public approval. In case you're wondering, there is plenty of oversight. Both the IRS and attorneys general have oversight and regulatory responsibility for our sector, and I can assure you they exercise that responsibility vigorously. But the fact remains that we are uniquely free to focus on and pursue just about any charitable purpose that fits the very broad mandate left to us by our founder, Beatrice Joyce Keene. She left us $140 million in 1972 and limited our giving only to, quote, religious, charitable, scientific, literary, and educational purposes. Obviously, that's a broad mandate and should feel quite liberating, or so you might imagine. But those of you who have teenage children, or those of you who ever were a teenager, probably have heard a variation on the words, with freedom comes responsibility. And with the freedom that we have as a private foundation, we realize that there is a duty to use these resources in the public interest and to take full advantage of the opportunity that we have to make a difference. We could choose almost any issue, focus on almost any timeline, be as disciplined as results as we choose, or not. We could spend our money responding to immediate human suffering, direct services. We could focus on infrastructure needs of cultural institutions. We could support research and try to find a cure for diseases that plague people. We could join others in trying to rid the world of AIDS. Obviously, it's kind of an infinite list. But as it happens, in large part because of the leadership of the folks on our board who are in this room and others on our board, our foundation has chosen none of those particular compelling issues. We've chosen a different route. We have chosen to scale our giving to challenges that we think we can move the needle on and take advantage of our ability to take a long-term view of some risky propositions. Because of our size, which is certainly significant, but it's nowhere near a Gates, for example, with its $32 billion. In our location, we're headquartered in Chicago. Our original donor was very much rooted in this area. We have chosen to focus here in the Midwest, and we have chosen to concentrate almost exclusively on policy. So why policy? Because the lives of millions of people are affected every day by the policies and practices of government and business. At Joyce, our primary interest is to improve the quality of life of everyday people in the Midwest, a quality of life that we believe should include a clean environment, a good education, a decent job, and protection from violence. We focus on improving public policy because public systems such as education and welfare affect the lives of so many people, and because public policies help shape private sector decisions about jobs and the environment. The problems we focus on are obviously vast and subject to massive economic and political forces. And our budget is essentially a rounding error when compared to the bureaucracies we're often trying to change. We study the research to identify the best opportunities and the smartest approaches, but believe me, we have a healthy dose of humility when it comes to setting goals for ourselves, or even for that matter, taking any credit when things go right. That said, let me give you a few concrete examples of issues we're focused on right now. I'd like to take a crack at education. We focus our grant making in education in 3 cities, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland, each of which has a largely poor and minority student body. As I mentioned, our money, we spend about $8 million a year in grant making in that area, is tiny. Chicago's budget is about $5 billion, for example. But at the same time, the CPS, Chicago Public Schools, has almost no discretionary money. So they have very little flexibility to experiment or to explore new ideas, which is where we can play a role. So what's our approach? Here's an example. We know, because there is research that proves it, and because it is common sense, that the single most important factor in a child's success in school is the quality of the teacher standing in front of the classroom. There is solid research showing that a child who has a good teacher 3 years in a row does better than a child that has bad teachers 3 years in a row, and that gap never narrows. The child who has the poor teachers falls behind and never catches up through the end of high school. This can affect that child for the rest of his or her life. Okay, so teachers matter. No surprise to anybody in the room, especially if you've ever had a good teacher or a really bad teacher. But we thought there might be something else going on that hadn't actually been proven before. So we commissioned a nonprofit think tank called the Education Trust. It's based in Washington, to look at the distribution of quality teachers based on the socioeconomic status of the schools. What they found was that the poorest, most needy schools systematically and consistently were staffed by teachers with the lowest qualifications, and kids' achievement suffered accordingly. Now, I know that's kind of a tough thing to say, since it's clearly a criticism of a wonderful group of people who are in many cases working in terribly difficult conditions. But what we discovered is that teachers, especially those working in the toughest schools, really get very little support. They feel isolated, little appreciated, and in fact, they quit in droves. Roughly 50% of new teachers leave their jobs within the first 5 years. So I said Joyce is interested in policy solutions to thorny problems. What are some of the solutions to this problem? A lot of them are relatively simple, and many are things that the Chicago Public Schools are already doing or want to do. Arnie Duncan and his team have set Chicago up to be a national leader to improve teacher quality, and we're working to support his efforts. We set out to make a systematic and comprehensive set of grants to get at this problem and promote solutions. Here's a couple of examples. Change hiring and recruiting. Use basic business principles to redesign the way teachers are recruited, move the hiring date earlier so the best prospects don't accept jobs in other places, and so on. Do a better job of supporting new teachers. The New Teacher Network at the University of Chicago is providing intensive support to 325 first and second year teachers in some of Chicago's highest need schools, and Arnie and his team are trying to scale this model program up. Reward teachers for taking on tough assignments and for their success with challenging student populations. In some ways, this may be the toughest job because it means finding ways to work with the union to change compensation structures that have been in place for generations. But there is federal money available for experimenting with new reward systems, and the foundation is working hard to help CPS get some of that money. So teachers matter, policies can be changed, and working with forward-thinking leaders like Arnie Duncan and his team makes us optimistic about change. Changing subjects, another area, the environment is a major focus for us. We're among the largest environmental funders in the region. We have a long history of working to improve water quality in the Great Lakes as well as reducing air pollution. A brand new project for us is our work on coal and coal-fired power plants. Basically, we took a look at the biggest environmental problems in our region. We analyzed which of these seemed ripe for change and might be susceptible to a sustained intensive push from us and our environment grantees. Burning coal obviously has huge environmental problems. For one thing, it dumps mercury and other pollutants in the air, which settle on and poison our lakes and cause illness among our citizens. For another, burning coal dumps carbon dioxide into the air, and of course that's the primary cause of global warming. The United States, as you all have heard ad nauseum, is the world's largest emitter of CO2. And 40% of that comes from burning coal for electricity. So it's a big problem. How do we get at it? First, we concluded that because coal is the most abundant energy source in the world, think China and India, it's not going away. Any way to make it clean should be encouraged. Some of our friends in the environmental community disagree with this. They think that the only answer is conservation and alternative energy sources. But we think this is only part of the solution, and coal is here to stay. Second, there is new technology called coal gasification, which allows mercury and other pollutants to be stripped out, as well as the CO2. Third, in our region, there are 36 new coal plants in development just in the Midwest alone. Once built, they'll operate for 60 to 80 years. If they are all built using conventional technology, we'll lock in huge emission increases for an entire generation. So there's a sense of urgency on this one. What is Joyce doing? A couple of things. We're going to challenge construction of conventional coal as bad policy. We're supporting citizen groups in 3 states to do that. We're going to promote the potential of the new technology among regulators, public utility commissions, groups like that have a lot to say in approving which plants get built, and we're going to help them understand why they should use this new technology. Third, we're going to support the corporate leaders in the coal and utility industries who do see the potential of clean coal. And fourth, we're going to support research and analysis of the costs and risks of this so that the financial community, which is essential to financing these billion-dollar plants, is comfortable with the new technology. We think the issue may be at a tipping point. Already some companies are moving ahead with the new technology. 3 years from now, we hope that conventional coal plants will have gone the way of the typewriter and the Midwest will have moved on. I have one more issue that I want to highlight. It's a smaller part of our portfolio, but it's of great importance to our community, and that is gun violence. As I mentioned earlier, we place priority on the right of people to live without violence in their lives. That's not really a controversial topic until you bring up guns. The facts are fairly stark. There are 30,000 gun deaths every year in the United States. Some of them are murder, some suicides, some accidents. It is a fact demonstrated by excellent research that access to guns increases deaths. States that have more guns per capita have a higher death rate from guns than states with a lower gun rate per capita. And finally, most Americans support reasonable gun laws by a large margin. The tragic events of the last week should only reinforce the urgency with which we address this problem. But there is a powerful and fanatical lobby that stands in the way of reasonable gun laws. In fact, it promotes policies that seem anything but reasonable. The gun lobby is so focused on maintaining access to guns that they have worked. I'm going to give you three examples of things the gun lobby has been promoting. Earlier this year, the NRA was pushing a bill in Congress that would make it a crime for federal agents to share gun tracing data. Ask Superintendent Klein how he feels about that. Right after September 11th, the NRA managed to pass a law that mandated instant destruction of background checks on gun purchases. They also managed to pass a law to make it possible for people who are on the no-fly list because they are considered terror risks to purchase 50 caliber sniper rifles that could bring down an aircraft. Those are just 3 examples, and Rosanna Ander is in the room today. She could probably give you 30 more off the top of her head. All of this is taking place after what this country has gone through after September 11th. It doesn't really make sense. We stand shoulder to shoulder with leaders who are willing to stand up on this issue, like Mayor Barrett of Milwaukee, who has been absolutely fantastic, Mayor Bloomberg of New York, who has been way out there in promoting sane gun laws. Our own Superintendent Phil Klein, who is a wonderful partner and a great leader in the law enforcement community, and of course Mayor Daley. At some risk, all of them are willing to stick their necks out to promote laws and regulations that will reduce the flow of illegal guns in our communities. What does Joyce do? Well, some specifics. We support research into law enforcement strategies. I know Superintendent Klein gave a great talk just last week and mentioned targeted response units. We have done some research about why that strategy can work, and we like to give law enforcement leaders some facts that they can base their decisions on in terms of how they direct their resources. Next spring, with our support, we're going to bring law enforcement leaders from around the Midwest with some national leaders as well to share their own ideas for reducing gun violence. We support coalitions of mayors who seek to act together to develop model legislation, policy ideas, to identify and bring together partners at the leadership and grassroots levels to stand up to the gun lobby on an issue that is a scourge to our society. We appreciate the support of all of these leaders and are going to do what we can over the next few years to make their efforts as successful as possible. So just to conclude, I want to go back to public policy and why we are interested in public policy. Good public policy can improve the lives of people in our communities. This belief drives the best elected officials and top civic leaders, and it is at the core of our grant making. We're willing to take risks and to take on tough issues. We encourage experimentation and the generation of new ideas, and we are accepting of the inevitable missteps that come with taking chances. And again, I want to give credit to our board, because if they weren't so accepting of missteps, I'd probably be out of here a little while ago. Chicago has been a great place for us to operate for a lot of reasons, but mostly because of the leadership in this community. I've used this line before, but it really is appropriate for us. There is this proverb, which I think is Korean, but it says that a turtle never moves forward without sticking its neck out. And I think it's sort of apt because we're a little like that turtle. We're not reckless, but we are willing to stick our neck out on the things that we really care deeply about. Thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, to begin with, next time I make a speech, Paula, to the broadcasters, I hope I have you introducing me. You're wonderful. Okay. Ellen, Dr. Whitaker was here last week, and he talked to us about possible pandemic of flu, certainly the AIDS problem. And I asked him, and he said he couldn't do it. I said, what if we insisted that every felon who's released after serving his time from a jail in Illinois was asked to and made to take a flu shot and an AIDS test? And he said, we can't do it. They got civil rights, and they won't say yes. Is there anything Joyce can do to help that? Because they're releasing people in the population who could give us flu, for God's sake.
I might defer back to Dr. Whitaker on that one. It's an interesting idea, but we don't have any leverage on that particular issue. But thanks for bringing it up.
Hello, I'm Morgan Carter from Omnibus Television. I have 2 questions that relate to education and public safety. My goddaughter wrote a grant for $250,000 to impact the fact that 7 out of 10 children who have a parent in jail also get into the system. And my figures may be off a little bit, but that's a statistic that we shouldn't tolerate. As an experiment, my wife and I taught in a school 1 hour, 1 day a week in an urban school that I won't name. And what we found is that the issue of violence really is a thing that affects the teachers and the students. Many students don't even come to school because they're afraid of what's going to happen, being intimidated, and so forth. Could you address those two things? How is Joyce dealing with violence in the schools, especially, and it's all over, it's not just the inner city schools, and also recidivism in terms of the children. You said that you want to have long-term impact, but we need to get these kids that are 6 to 16 because they're bound to have a CN number, all right? Thank you.
Two things. One is we have done, and thank you for your question, we are very interested in gun trafficking, which clearly relates to violence and the threat of violence in the schools. And we're interested in understanding how people gain access to guns and how you can reduce their access to guns. And that sort of research feeds directly into both law enforcement strategies, but we also share our information with Chicago Public Schools, and I know they make a huge effort to address hot spots in the system. So to the extent that our research and information can be helpful in law enforcement strategies, we're very interested in that. On recidivism, we don't really deal with juvenile populations, but we do, as Paula mentioned, have a new initiative on transitional jobs. It's a huge issue. People coming out of prison, a very large percent of them pop right back into jail. Why is that? A lot of complicated reasons for that, but one is they aren't able to get a job. So we're experimenting with a new strategy for providing transitional jobs or subsidized job experiences for people coming out of prison. Again, it's the adult population, not the juvenile population. There's a little article from the New York Times that you probably have at your seat that describes this program. I'd be happy to give you more information about that another time.
Yeah, Edward Cooper, member of the City Club. On the environment, interested you talking about coal and coal gasification and so forth. I understood that there was a project in Illinois to start wind farms, which has been prevented by some people in Cape Cod who don't want their view impeded. Why are you interested in coal instead of something like wind power, which I guess being in Chicago is would be very useful?
We are certainly interested in alternative energy sources and have been a supporter of that in the past, but we don't believe that that is going to solve our energy problems going forward on its own. So many of our grantees work on that, and we think it's a great thing. But if you do the math, you've got to figure out how to make coal a clean energy source as well as the alternative energy sources.
Okay.
Hi, Adam Scheffler, an individual member for now of the City Club and a health policy analyst. Could you give folks here who aren't so familiar with the nonprofit sector an idea of what makes the Joyce Foundation's emphasis on policy, public policy, rather unique, or maybe how it's not so unique in the context of other things going on in the U.S. sector, especially considering changes that are being considered at the federal level to, about nonprofit organizations, charities, and how advocacy and public policy fits into those changes?
Let me address the advocacy question. Advocacy is kind of a dirty word in the foundation world for some people because you don't want to get too close to lobbying, and there's a fine line there, and it is illegal for foundation money to be used for lobbying, but it is not illegal for foundation money to be used for advocacy. We view advocacy as a major tool. So we do a lot of research and think tanky kinds of stuff, but we always pair it with effective advocacy. The point isn't just to be right. The point is to get something done. So it's a very critical part of our work.
Well, just comment on the other part about the changes that are being proposed for the whole nonprofit sector and governance and accountability, level? And by the sector itself and Senator Grassley, et cetera.
Senator Grassley is very interested in controlling, more carefully controlling what goes on in our sector. He has concerns about spending on the part of private foundations, and he is concerned about illegal lobbying. So the sector, and I have been very involved with both of those issues, and what can I say? The sector is also concerned. Nothing like United States Senator yelling at you to sort of focus your mind. There's a lot happening on that front, and I think you'll see some announcements over the next 6 months from the independent sector and the Council on Foundations about a new self-regulatory environment. Thank you so much.
How about a final round of applause? Adjourned.